Every year around this time we start hearing crazy rumors. And I didn't pay any attention to this one at the start. I didn't. But I'm going to address this because I think it's ridiculous. And Ed Willis writes about it in the Province. And now it's got legs. It's been picked up by Detroit Press. And I personally think this rumor is without merit. So Jim Benning is a lame duck GM. I get it. Ken Holland is a lame duck GM. The idea is, at the end of this season, Ken Holland will be let go by the Detroit Red Wings. He would then move into Vancouver, where he would become the general manager, and Jim Benning would be in charge of player development. Great. The problem is this. One, I don't think Vancouver is willing to move on from Jim Benning right now. I know there's a lot of people who are detractors of Jim Benning's, and I get it. But Jim Benning's deals have, for the most part, been pretty good. Yes, he's thrown too much money at Louis Eriksson, but there were other teams that were lined up for Louis Eriksson's services that year, too. And he has kept a lot of veterans on the books, which has made a lot of people angry. Canuck fans like, we want to see the kids. The kids aren't ready. Like, the idea that Pettersson and Lind or any of these guys were anywhere near ready is kind of insane. Pettersson could be ready by next fall, absolutely. But speeding up, putting guys in the lineup like Goldobin should be in there. Why? So I didn't mind signing Vanek and Gagne and Del Zotto and the players who got signed in Nelson, because I thought that it insulated the kids who aren't ready yet from coming in. Burmistrov was brought in when it was obvious there wasn't room in the lineup for Burmistrov. They mutually agreed that he'd retire and go home, and Virtanen has a full-time spot. And of course, Virtanen's been the lightning rod too, because Virtanen's not what he was supposed to be, yada, yada, yada. And then Brock Besser's taken some of the pressure off of that because Besser's been fantastic. So there's good and there's bad with Benning, as there is with almost any GM. Ken Holland has spent the Red Wings into a corner. Part of the reason why I believe that his contract hasn't been renewed is because of this. The Detroit Red Wings have an issue with the salary cap going forward and with the fact that they're at the cap and they're still not a playoff team. He has been loyal to players to a fault. He has been willing to trade away futures for veteran players, and now he's got a lineup that it's going to be very hard going forward for Detroit to become a contender again. His once great drafting record has become more spotty over the last, say, 5 years than it was before that. And I know people are going to say, well, you know, he doesn't have top draft picks. The other problem is, 20 years ago, they're miles ahead of everybody else with European scouting. They don't have that advantage anymore. Ken Holland's a good GM, but I don't see Ken Holland coming to Vancouver. And I honestly, at this point, if he came to Vancouver, wouldn't be particularly happy about it. Because what's funny is, in the Province article, they say, hey, look at all the Stanley Cups that Detroit's won under Ken Holland. Wouldn't it be great if Vancouver could get there? Yeah, but it's not that simple. A GM moving from one organization to another doesn't mean the Stanley Cup's following him. That's just not how it works. And the idea that Ken Holland, who's made some major mistakes in Detroit, wouldn't make major mistakes in Vancouver is just, it's silly. And every GM makes his share of mistakes. Almost every team, you can look at one contract on the roster and say they probably shouldn't have signed that. But it's just the way that the market usually is. This past summer was one of those few times where everybody was relatively sane with their contracts. But remember, Detroit didn't have any money to throw around. So maybe part of the reason that things were sane this past summer is because Ken Holland didn't have money to throw around. Now this summer, if the Sedins retire, that frees up a lot of money under the cap. Vancouver has tons of money under the cap, a good young roster that's up and coming, and some really solid prospects in their system. If Ken Holland comes in, he's going to want to make a splash. He's going to look and say, well, we want Tavares. He's not going to get Tavares. Tavares won't come to Vancouver. But I would be very frightened of Ken Holland saying, well, the Sedins have retired, so I'm going to bring in 2 veterans to replace them, and signing a couple of guys for $6 or $6.5 million who just don't make it. I mean, we've seen it before with him. I think Franz Nielsen was too long of a term. I think the money was fine. The term was too long. Stephen Weiss was a mistake for Detroit. There are mistakes that you find for Detroit with their free agency, and it's usually because Ken Holland is trying to patch a team together so they can at the very least make the playoffs. Vancouver needs a GM who's committed to a rebuild. Jim Benning has finally admitted this is a rebuild. You bring in Ken Holland, Holland's desire to be competitive and get into the playoffs right away could take over. I'm hoping that this doesn't go anywhere, and I'm hoping that this rumor dies off, because I can't see it. I can't see Ken Holland being the GM of the Canucks. And I think all it is just, it's pie in the sky dreaming by Canuck writers, and, you know, I get it. We want to win something, we want to do something in the playoffs, and we've never got to that holy land of winning a Stanley Cup. But I just don't see Ken Holland as the solution. Remember, Detroit fans themselves are saying Holland needs to go. Detroit fans themselves are saying we should have had Steve Yzerman for GM and let Ken Holland go years ago. And they're right. If the Canucks decide by the end of this year, well, we're going to move on for Benning, find somebody new. Don't recycle a GM. Don't do it. It to me, it's like one of the worst examples of this I remember is when Toronto brought back Cliff Fletcher, and it just felt forced. It was like Toronto's like, okay, we can't go to a rebuild. Here's Cliff Fletcher back. Remember, he got us Gilmore. Remember, and it's a bad idea. So you guys can let me know what you think about this rumor. I don't think there's anything to it. I think Benning's going to get one more year after this year. I think they'll look at this season and then next season and say, are we trending in the right direction, or is this organization just falling off a cliff? I disagree with people that say that if the Canucks had stayed healthy, they would have stayed in a playoff spot. I don't see that. I don't think they're good enough for that. But I also disagree with people who say that Benning's a bum and he's a horrible GM, because he has made some good moves. He has made some smart moves. And when a prospect is like Shinkarik was, he knows when to get out. Forsling was a mistake, but you know, he did pretty well with the rest of his deals, and I really don't have a problem with the free agent signings this past summer. I think it's been good. I think you have to keep the Canucks competitive, and again, give the kids time to develop. Holland is good at that in Detroit. That's the one thing that he'd bring with him. With these two as a brain trust, I think it would be good. But again, the other thing that got mentioned in the Detroit article about this is that Ken Holland right now reports directly to the owner. If Ken Holland came to Vancouver, he'd have to report to Trevor Linden, who goes to the owner. He may not like that setup. So if Ken Holland comes in, Trevor Linden might be out of a job, because Holland might come in saying, I want to be GM and president. And that might be just a bit too much, because I think for me as a Vancouver fan, I think Trevor Linden's been pretty transparent, and I think he's got the right attitude, and I think he's done well as a president can. With a team that when they inherited it was laden with some really bad contracts and some players who were on the downswing. And now that the Sedins are going to retire, we can finally see the young guys come together and really see the Canucks start to rise as a brand new team. The last thing I'd want to see is Ken Holland coming in and trying a quick fix. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section below, as I don't see it happening personally. I'm just doing this because the rumors are out there and they're crazy. But I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.